So next up, we're honored to have Kindall Gray. And so Kindall received her MFA in creative writing from the U of A in 2010. Her fiction has appeared in One Story and other journals, and she lives here in Tucson, where she teaches English at the U of A and acts as assistant fiction editor at Cutthroat Literary Journal. So please welcome Kindall.
Hello, thanks Lisa. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. So when I got the word, Diana, 2 weeks ago, I had trouble at first coming up with something to write. And I've been buried in grading too, so I haven't really been writing. But finally I was like, there's the moon, there's animals, there's hunting, there's childbirth, there's a lot here I can pull from. So I just started writing, and the story went in some really strange kind of directions. But I enjoyed writing it, so I hope you all enjoy hearing it. And it's kind of like a flash fiction piece, maybe, that might turn into a full-length short story, perhaps. The Shifting of Bones. The moon was awful, full and white, a bad omen. Twigs and rocks crunched beneath Leona's shoes. She worried about disturbing the birds, raccoons, squirrels, wolves that owned the forest behind her house. Her mother said she had a distrust of nature, and maybe she did. Animals stared at her with their nothing eyes, thinking their nothing thoughts, feeling their nothing feelings. There was no reasoning, no bargaining with animals. They didn't care that she was a good Baptist, that she lived in Adrian her whole life, that she helped her brothers and sisters get dressed for school each morning, or that she had bread or seeds. They'd take the bread and seeds and eat her eyes out just the same. Tonight she was wearing her dressing gown and walking boots, and her hair was down, not even pinned up in barrettes. There was no jewelry on her neck or ears. She'd left in a rush when she got the phone call. "Meet me," Benjamin said, "and I'll tell you again how much I love you." She checked that her family was asleep, added wood to the stove so the house would stay warm, and slipped out the back door into the dark. They'd been secretly seeing each other for 6 weeks. He loved her all right. He loved her all the time. Even when she was cooking dinner for her brothers, even when she was sitting on a church pew, her hands clasped in front of her face, even when she bathed and washed the backs of her knees, even when she fell into bed. And he loved her again when they were together. He kissed and hugged her, and lately he'd been taking her clothes off, and she liked that too. She liked all of it, the good and the bad. And sometimes she thought she was as distrustful of God as she was of nature. After all, why would God want her to stop doing something so wonderful with a man so loving as Benjamin? Now she pushed further through the forest. A tree branch whipped against her face. He said, "Walk toward the river and we'll find each other." But she'd been walking for a while now, and there was no sign of him. Her heartbeat quickened. "Benjamin," she said. A bird cawed. "Benjamin?" Another caw. "Oh, quiet," she said, and immediately regretted it when the birds flapped in the branches overhead, shaking leaves into her hair as if out of vengeance. The night echoed and the moon lit her path. If she turned around, she wasn't sure she could find her way home. She was 18 and had never been approached by a boy or man. She thought it had something to do with her circumstances, that her father had left her mother, that she never had pretty clothes, and of course that her face was lopsided. It had been lopsided since she was born. "God wanted you to suffer," her mother told her, "so suffer you will. It will make you a better person." Leona first noticed him at church. She looked up from her lap, and he was staring at her, a tangle of coal-black hair on top of his head, hard, peering, almost colorless blue eyes, and a soft, womanly mouth. His wife and 3 babies gathered around him in dreary-looking Sunday clothes. She nudged her mother. "Who's that?" she said. Her mother glanced in Benjamin's direction. His gaze didn't falter. "That's Mr. Hope," she said. "He's new in Adrian." She wrinkled and unwrinkled her lips. "Why? Why do you ask?" Leona sat up straight in the pew, just wondering. "Wondering leads to sin," her mother said. Leona's brothers and sisters stirred in their seats. The next week at church, Benjamin was staring at her again. His wife, thin and tired-looking, didn't seem to notice. Her face was drawn. She was breastfeeding a baby beneath a blanket. The figure of the baby moved like a fish underwater. Leona felt a flutter, a kind of heat in her stomach and lungs. The man, Mr. Hope, smiled. He was young, not that much older than Leona, 25 at most. A few weeks passed. She was walking to town one day to go to the grocery, and he drove by in a truck. Just him, not his wife and daughters. He pulled over, and suddenly Leona felt she was floating through a dream, pushing through a wall of trees and dirt. "Need a ride?" he said, hanging out the window. He was wearing a button-up plaid shirt, opened at the collar to reveal his chest hair. Without hesitation, she climbed in beside him. "You're a nice girl," he said. "I could tell when I saw you at church." "You seem nice, too," she said, glancing at him shyly. Soon they were necking. Once Benjamin, married Benjamin, started loving her, wanting her, needing her, she imagined her face shifting to normal. She imagined it so hard that when she looked into a mirror, it was as if her nose and lips had migrated, turned the right way, relaxed and settled into the bones of her face. One day they drove out to a field, and he began hugging her, pressing his lips against her throat, and he pulled away and whispered, "Your face is like, it reminds me of this old painting. It was Jesus, and he was on the cross, and his mouth was all twisted up." Leona stared at him. Her eyes widened, and then she felt tears. "Why, I," she said, and trailed off. "Not in a bad way," he said. "I mean, Jesus is very beautiful. His suffering was something beautiful. Yours is, too." "Is that what you like about me?" she said. "My face?" "Partly," he said. "Of course. I don't like regular things." "I thought it was getting better," she said. "Lately it's been looking better, since I met you." "Oh, it is," he said. "It has. 100 times better. The prettiest face I've ever seen." This was the first time he asked her to take off her clothes. She did. It was early morning, sunlight bathing the front seat of the truck, a feeling of newness everywhere. Leona clutched the air, searched for something, anything to grab onto. Later at home, she looked in the mirror, touched her nose, pushed at it. She went into the kitchen where her mother was cleaning and said, "Is my face still crooked?" Her mother stared at her. "Of course it is," she said, and moved her mop in a circle. Leona was lost in the forest. She thought she'd been heading toward the river, but now she wasn't sure. "Benjamin," she said. Her foot caught in the twisting trunk of a tree, and she went down against a rock. She touched her knee, the wetness of blood. If only Benjamin were here. He'd pick her up, kiss away the blood, carry her home. She heard the animal before she saw it. Click, 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 little feet against dirt. Her heart raced. She remembered suddenly what her mother had told her when she was very small, that all sin leads to heartache and confusion and loss. She didn't feel guilty exactly for leaving to meet a married man, but now her fear had started, and so of course began the guilt. Maybe more regret than guilt. "Who's there?" she said. 2 black eyes floating in the air appeared in front of her. The raccoon took shape in the darkness. The round face, button nose, white whiskers. Up on its hind legs, peering at her. Studying her. She was relieved. A raccoon and not, say, a wolf. An owl hooted overhead. "You dirty trickster," she said. The raccoon trembled, its little feet twitching. It cocked its head and finally, as if in slow motion, took a step toward her. It was maybe 10 feet away. "Scat," she yelled. The animal skittered off at top speed into the forest, its tail a white flag in the night. "Good," Leona said. "Good riddance." She rose to her feet. Benjamin wasn't coming, or maybe he was lost too. As she walked, this time in the opposite direction, she had a feeling of deep loneliness, like the loneliness she experienced before Benjamin loved her. Benjamin wasn't gone. He'd call her again. One of the kids must have gotten sick, or his wife woke up. It happens sometimes. But for tonight, it felt like he'd abandoned her. Leona's hands fluttered at her face, fingers still wet with blood, and she felt her nose and eyes, the familiarity of the crooked bones. The raccoon, at least, hadn't noticed. It may not have noticed what made her good and kind and human, but it also didn't notice what made her different, what made her look like Jesus screaming as his hands were nailed to the cross. Thank you.
Thank you so much.